So I'm going to talk about cloud cost estimates for Terraform. Let me start with this. So I didn't do my introduction. I'll do it now. Hi, everyone. My name is Ali, and I have a problem. So around 10 years ago, I started looking at cloud costs as part of my PhD. Back then, there were about 10,000 price points, and I was scraping them manually for my research. Today, there's more than 3 million price points between AWS, Azure, and Google, as you all know. So it's been 10 years, and I don't know why I have this unhealthy obsession, and I keep building tools for cloud costs. Back in 2012, I built one of the early cloud cost management products called RightScale Cloud Analytics. That was before EC2 had Cost Explorer, and our product was really helping managers and finance buy RIs and shut down unused instances and so on. After about 4 years of building that product, I started another company, this time developing a public container as a service platform. That was called AbraCloud. We were running Kubernetes on bare metals. That was also a lot of fun. And there we built our own billing engine for Kubernetes. That was in 2016. And we were charging for things like 100 megabyte RAM minutes and storage hours. So that startup was also acquired. And this time, I'm back, but I've got a different problem. So here's what I'm going to talk about today. I'll talk about my problem. I'm going to then share some of the use cases I've heard speaking to hundreds of other people who've got the same problem in the open source community. And I'm then going to delve into some of the technical challenges of why this problem is hard to solve and how the community, including you all, can potentially help. So Infracost is open source. We're backed by Y Combinator and Sequoia Capital. I've got nothing to sell. We don't have a paid product. So all this stuff you see is free, open source. Use it. I'm not trying to sell anything today. Here's what's been bothering me for the last year or so. So this is what the checkout experience looks like for an engineer buying cloud resources with Terraform. It's the same with CloudFormation, Pulumi, and the other infrastructure as code tools. So this change says, this plan, which I run to deploy the change essentially as part of the deployment process, it says it's going to add 18 resources. It's going to change 4 resources, and 2 resources are being destroyed. And it's asking me, do you want to perform these actions? And I'm like, yeah, okay, whatever. So I hit okay, deploy, and months go by. And the cloud costs just keep increasing. And then the budget is blown. And that's when the pain train starts. The CFO takes a dump, usually on the VP of engineering, who then takes a dump on engineering management, who then take a dump on DevOps teams or the engineering teams. And I'm like, what did we expect? The engineers didn't see any costs as part of that workflow, and no one really understood the implications of what they were doing until it was too late. So we now have to go back and we have to change all those things. If there's questions, should we do it interactive? I don't want to just drone on for like 20 minutes. Or I can click on the comments and see what normally works best, Dan.
Yeah, I mean, we can have people chime in. This is totally open. It's this discussion.
Cool. My mouse is disappearing, so I'm kind of scrolling in the comments to see, but I'm going to rely on people to unmute and just talk. That'll be easier. All right, so I think regardless of whether I'm buying a t-shirt or some compute, I should know the cost before I'm buying them. And that's what Infracost is doing. Here's a screenshot of the CLI tool when you run it against a Terraform project. So, and this is all before the resources are launched or changed. It's running through the code, and it's saying there's an EC2 instance about to be launched. It's going to cost that much. The IOPS are going to cost that much. There's some storage. It then, I've got an example here of a Lambda function. I'll come back to that because for Lambda, I don't know how many times that Lambda function is going to be called in advance, obviously, but we can still explain the pricing to the person who's about to launch that thing. What's cool is all of this you can do before the resources are launched. So in terms of the use cases and what I'm seeing from what our team is seeing from users, there's three main use cases. The first one is around just visibility upfront, being able to understand. Then the more advanced use case is around guardrails and cost policies. And then finally, around the actual estimation as a practice and doing things like what-if analysis. And really what we're trying to do is to make you love your cloud bill, not be surprised by it, not be shocked by it. It's really hard to imagine, but we'll see if we can make that happen, where you actually like this thing that you get at the end of the month. So use case one, cost visibility. This is what we mainly see from DevOps engineers, SREs, and infrastructure engineering teams. And these teams are usually quite small, and they're enabling the rest of the engineering organization and other teams to provision infrastructure as and when they need to. Usually they're the people implementing a self-service model in the organization. And what they're doing is putting Infracost in the workflow. Usually in GitHub pull requests, or if they're using things like Terraform Cloud, they're kind of using it there. And really the main point is, so all the engineering teams, one person puts it in, all the engineering teams can see those cost estimates before the resources are launched or changed. So that fixes that shopping cart issue, which now has costs. What does it look like? Here's an example screenshot from a GitHub pull request. So you can see a volume is being changed there in the code. And on the right-hand side, you can see the comment that says this change on these two projects in production and dev will have this implication in terms of costs. And we currently review security issues and performance issues during the code review process. So why not costs? And this is what we're trying to do now. The second use case is kind of more advanced, and it's around using engines such as Open Policy Agent. So let me just briefly provide a 2-second introduction. Open Policy Agent and things like HashiCorp Sentinel are like rules engines. So you can write rules that say, if this thing happens, block it, or put an advisory notice or things like that. And currently, people are using these tools for enforcing various best practices around security mainly. So things like this instance shouldn't have port, I don't know, 22 open to the entire world. Or when you're deploying S3, you got to make sure this flag is set so the whole bucket isn't public. So currently those tools are being used to enforce those types of policies. And what we're seeing is Infracost has a JSON output. That means it can be integrated with these other tools. So why don't we enable people to write rules around costs? So for example, if the costs increase by more than 15% in that pull request, I would like the team lead to review it. Or if the per instance costs are going to be more than $25 per hour because I've got some commitments or RIs or whatever, then add an advisory notice or block it. Or if the provisioned IOPS are going to cost more than the compute instance itself, that seems a bit odd. I'd like to review that. What does that look like? There's a screenshot at the bottom here, so you can see this cost policy failed, and it says, please check with Alistair Scott, who's a team lead, before proceeding with the change. This message you see here is all customizable. So whoever is writing the rules or the policies can put that message there. And then it says, why did that fail? So the IOPS must be less than the compute, and it shows you what the deal is. So really, it's to try and put in guardrails so the development team can move as fast as possible, but kind of stay within those rails. As one of our users put it, if you tell the team we need to get from A to B, and then offer them a Ford or a Ferrari, with no price tags whatsoever, guess what? Most people are going to go with the Ferrari. But that Ford is perfectly okay in dev and staging environments, and you might want to restrict that Ford to production environments. And that's what these cost policies enable you to do, because you can kind of bring that cost information into the provisioning flow as part of the deployment process. And finally, use case 3. So with use case number 1 around cost visibility and cost guardrails or policies, we're seeing that mainly with DevOps engineers, SRE, and infrastructure engineers. With this use case, we're mainly seeing it from architects and consultants who are either designing a new service or they're making major changes to an existing service, and they want to make better deployment decisions while developing that infrastructure code. So they're doing things like what if analysis, what if I deploy it with this infrastructure versus that one, and they want to usually share that cost estimate with their other stakeholders, whether it be external clients or internal stakeholders. And what they can do is to just create a share link. So I'm going to run the CLI on my machine, get a link, just send it to this other people so they can view the cost estimate, and then we can discuss it. So all of this is really to ultimately lead to a cost-aware culture. Our kind of underlying thesis is around the Prius effect, where it was observed that a large subset of Toyota Prius drivers would respond to the data on their driving dashboard by driving in a manner that decreased the fuel consumption. And we're wondering if we can bring all that cost information into the provisioning workflow, can we do the same for cloud costs? And this is what I've been working on for the last year or so. So,
Ali, quick question for you, if you don't mind. First of all, this is super cool. This is definitely, I could definitely see a need for some of this, and we do some of this for our clients. One of the things I'm curious, kind of just using your analogy before of the Ferrari and the Ford, right? When you report on sort of cost delta or change when you're spinning up, does it also take into account all the associated sort of cost of services? So for example, in your analogy, if you're buying a Ferrari, does it just give you the list price of the Ferrari, or also the cost of the insurance and the maintenance and the, you know, everything else involved?
The overhead. Yeah. Right. At the moment, it's just the list price, but other users on our GitHub are requesting exactly that. They're saying, hey, there's other overheads associated with that. Can we add those in? And what we'd like to do longer term is to kind of provide that. But at the moment, the main unknown is just even what is that list price? Right.
Okay. Because like one thing I definitely see is, so for example, when we have clients and we do work for them, we give them an estimate of what what the change will be, right? Like you're spinning up 20 extra instances, this is what it's going to be. But also there's associated, like they have got enterprise support, so that when they get their bill and we told them that this is your bill is going to increase estimate by this amount, but it actually comes X plus whatever because of they got support charges associated, snapshot cost, transfer costs, everything else. Then they're a little bit surprised. And so I think having that extra step, to really get at the final number that they're going to get on the bill is so important, right? Because it's one thing to say, these are your extra costs for spinning up, this amount of instances or storage or whatever, but really trying to guess what that final bill is at the end of the month is going to be key.
It's tricky, yeah. I think you're right. It's about setting expectations. One thing we're very clear in the tool is that these are estimates. These are not like 100%. And a lot of people, when we tell them, hey, this isn't like 100%, we're not doing showback and chargeback here. That's what I did like 7 years ago. And all of the pains back then were trying to match whatever the bill was. Like that was like 80% of our issues with RightScale Cloud Analytics. Down to like the sense, especially when dealing with finance, they wanted to match. And it makes sense for those use cases. With Infracost, the CLI tool, they're like, yeah, I know this is like potentially 10 to 15% off for my use case. I just want to have that rough estimate. Like, should I be worried about this? Or is this like, less than, I don't know, $1,000 and I just shouldn't care and just move on, keep going. But you're right. Some way where you can basically What people are doing right now is taking the cost estimate and then adding they're kind of setting expectations around it and then sharing that. They're not just sending like the direct link. But that's a great point. Any other questions?
I think Patrick had a really good question in the chat that I haven't seen it. And then it was, and you may have answered this by saying it's an estimate, but is Infracost grabbing what the current, is it just estimating what the current code is launching, what that price is, or is it grabbing actuals? I think you answered it.
I'll show an example of what we do about the actuals or the usage-based resources and why that's tricky in 3 or 4 slides.
Cool.
This is an area we would love feedback on as well. So this will probably help. Let me just jump in to show you how does it work. So there's a CLI piece and there's a cloud pricing API piece. Both are open source. So the CLI piece parses the infrastructure as code, and we're dealing at the moment with the Terraform plan JSON, and we're looking for anything that might have costs. So we're doing things like the instance type, volumes, Lambda functions, whatever, database subscriptions, anything we can find. We're kind of looking for those in that code. And then we're calling the cloud pricing API. This is the 3rd cloud pricing API I've developed. This one's using GraphQL. It has a self-updating mechanism, and you can deploy this yourself in less than 15 minutes. But most people use the hosted one we do because it has the on-demand prices from all those 3 vendors. So the CLI essentially looks up the prices in this API. Why do we need an API? Well, because the cloud vendors don't make it easy to look up the prices, right? And we want one standard API where I can plug in any vendor in there and then look up the prices and not have to download 2,000 JSON files and parse them one by one. That's not going to work. So the CLI then makes a call to the API to find all the prices, and then the CLI calculates the cost estimate, and it outputs text, HTML, or JSON. The JSON is the one we're seeing a lot of people use to integrate with other tools. Let me talk about some of the challenges of doing this then. And specifically, I'll talk about the usage data as well. So on the left-hand side here is a screenshot of Azure Synapse, one of the services they have. And you can see the pricing table there. It has all the various kind of usage-based stuff, the fixed prices, different options, and so on. And then on the right side, you see the Terraform resources or the infrastructure as code resources associated with that service. So there's about 15 resources there, and each of those has different parameters like account tier and account kind and name and stuff like that. So the first key challenge we have to solve is how the heck do I map these two together? And guess what we're doing? Manually looking at these resources and these pricing web pages and writing code to figure out what's what. For this service, it took a few days. For S3, it took Alistair about a week. This is full-time, 1 week. He went through all the various footnotes, everything, every damn thing in the AWS S3 pricing page. And there was 55 cost components in there. And each price then has tiers, and it depends on which parameter you're using. And what's really cool is we're engineering this stuff. So we've got automated tests that then fail when the prices change or when a cost component is outputting a different thing and we didn't expect that. So we can update this thing quickly. But it is very complicated. Second thing, this stuff changes, as you all know. And then there's bugs in pricing data. Don't think there's no bugs in this pricing data. So here is a screenshot of one of our open source contributors who was adding the mapping for the Azure Synapse service, and they found a bug in the cost calculator for Azure. They asked them to fix it. What's really cool is once we've got this mapping in the open source done by someone in the community, everyone can benefit. So then you don't need to like worry about the pricing footnotes and all. You just run this thing. It says, here's your estimate. And then finally, so usage-based resources, stuff like Lambda or cloud storage. So the first iteration was, I don't know how much you're going to use that stuff. So instead, I'm going to explain the pricing to you. So not costs, but prices. So for example, for Lambda, I can still explain to the engineers that this thing you're launching has these two parameters, requests and duration. And that's how the prices are defined. That was the first iteration. The second iteration, we said, what if there's a file, a YAML file or text file where they can provide some estimates like, hey, what if my Lambda function makes 3 million requests a month? And what if the average duration looking up stuff like Datadog or CloudWatch is about 125 milliseconds? How much would that cost me? And then finally, we're now fetching data from CloudWatch. So when you run the tool for about 10 resources, we've done this, and we're kind of wanting to add more, is we've got the parameters mapped, and then we're also figuring out which parameter in CloudWatch does this usage number come from. So can we just look that up automatically, and can we bring that into the workflow? So the engineer then knows in the last 30 days, this bucket made this many requests. Kind of gives you a better indication of it's a more accurate cost estimate. Now, this is not pulling in the curves or the actual bills or anything like that yet. It's just pulling in the usage data.
Can I comment on that real quick?
Go for it.
For anybody who has enterprise support with Amazon, if you are not using private pricing, ask your rep about it. And private pricing is all private pricing on every single service is commit based. So you say, I'm using CloudFront and I'm going to I commit that I'll use 40 terabytes a month or 400 terabytes a month on CloudFront specific service every month. Now they don't have an overage charge, but you have to like fall within the number, and then they'll drop the regular pricing. So like the list pricing will drop. So defining it in the YAML, I mean, some feedback on that is actually pretty excellent for a lot of reasons in those use cases.
Interesting. That segues very nicely to the other bunch of problems we got to solve, which is custom price books, RIs, discounts, saving plans, and this is what the users want next. That we plan to handle as part of the paid product, because when we speak to AWS, we're like, hey, where's your API where I can fetch all the custom? They're like, there's no single API. I'm like, okay, this in 2010, you told me there's no pricing API, so I had to scrape your shit, and I'll do the same until you give me that API, because we're going to work around these problems. Because, like, I don't know, we have to automate this stuff. There is no way we can expect people to like do this stuff manually in spreadsheets going forward. It's become too complicated. So that's one of the challenges, is just the customizations to the on-demand prices. Then what we're finding is everybody does provisioning their own way. There is no standard provisioning workflow for cloud resources. Even if you're using Terraform with GitHub, people do it in different ways, which means if you're building a CLI tool or any sort of workflow-based tool, you have to handle the edge cases. And that takes a lot of time and effort. And there's then a lot of these different CI/CD systems. So companies have Jenkins, GitHub, there's like a bunch of these CI/CD systems. And ideally, the cost information would be in all these systems. So you don't need to go log into another dashboard. You just kind of keep doing what you're doing as an engineer, and you see the cost information there. And that's another challenge we got to solve. And that's where the community comes in. So there's, so far we have about more than 50 amazing contributors, and between them and with our help, we've added about 200 mappings just for Terraform. We've also identified more than 500 free resources, because the free stuff is also important. So you can just use it. We're like, hey, this stuff is free. Just keep launching it. It doesn't matter. Apart from just doing the mapping work, which takes a lot of time, they're providing us feedback and bug reports, because they're using this in their workflow. And until this is being used with Jenkins version X and Terraform version Y with Azure and these resources, there's like some edge case we haven't handled. We're like, all right, let's handle that. And that's where the use cases are also coming from, so we can kind of work on them and see what do we do about the other stuff. So I want to show you a quick demo. A lot of the integrations, the CI/CD integrations, are also being aided by the community. because like I'm not an expert on Bitbucket pipelines, and the person who is doing that is, so they can then help us add the integration. So we've got pre-built integrations now for GitHub Actions, GitLab, Atlantis, which is an open source competitor, I guess, to Terraform Cloud, somewhat, but much more limited in scope. Azure DevOps, Circle CI, Bitbucket, and Jenkins. And then what's been really cool is other companies like Scalar, Spacelift, and M0, which are building products to launch cloud resources. They're like the orchestration tools for cloud. They are pulling in Infracost into their dashboard. So they're saying, okay, we're going to use Infracost to get the cost estimate and add that in. And with Terraform Cloud, as part of HashiCorp, we've got our partnership with them. So it's kind of integrated into workflow by default. So here's how it looks with something like Terraform Cloud. You go over to Infracost, you sign up, and you get a webhook. Then you go over to wherever it is you're provisioning the workflow. So in Terraform Cloud, you put that webhook in, and then you kind of enable it. Do you want this thing to block pull requests? Like, do you want to deploy, to be blocked, or do you just want an advisory note that says, hey, just FYI, here's how much it costs. So that's the difference between kind of use case 1 and 2. And that's it. You enable that on a work project or workspace, they call it. And you can see the cost estimate is kind of left there at the bottom. And when you click on that link, you kind of get one of those share links again. So you can then start a discussion around, hey, do we need this? Does this make sense? Or like 80% of the time, it's just go. It's just fine. Just keep shipping, keep moving fast. That's it. That's a link to our docs. And if you're interested in contributing, that's the main GitHub repository where we're building in the open. That's my Twitter handle and email if you'd like to contact me. Thanks. Happy to answer more questions. And I've got some questions for you as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much. This is such a cool tool. And I'm so excited to have you here to kind of share and have everybody talk about it. I know there are a bunch of questions in the chat during the talk. Feel free to unmute yourselves and ask them out loud instead.
Yeah, I'm going to scroll while people ask as well.
I was just curious on the Terraform mapping. Are you doing like a module per endpoint? Are you doing like a block of modules for like, say like Azure and saying like, hey, it's going to be this block and it'll be like these 6 endpoints are always used type of deal?
Normally we start from the resource itself. So somebody will say, hey, I ran Infracost and it doesn't have the mapping for like this resource. So there's like the cloud service, let's say S3, and then the way Terraform model that service is by breaking down into a bunch of resources. We usually start from the resources, and then from there we kind of one by one go through the parameters and then look up the pricing to see like what's the mapping look like. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. So you're using like resource blocks instead of modules.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. That's it. For usually the modules will have like references to resources inside.
Yep.
So when we show the output, you will be able to see like this resource was used in this module.
Okay.
What users are asking for next is, can you show me just the summary cost of each module? Because like this is my standard database module that I use in all the teams. And when I'm making a change to that, I'd like to understand the implication for these 50 teams that are using it before I deploy this change to the template.
Yeah, like I do like an account at the module level.
Got it.
And because there's so many accounts that are nested under like consolidated. So for AWS that works. I don't know. I wouldn't know on the other providers, but like the account at the module level, and then inside resource blocks and different resources based on the service that are actually represent.
Yeah. And I guess like at some point tags, like for costs, tags are kind of pretty nice, right? So you might want to just break down by tags or filter on tags.
A question. So I mean, I'm assuming all these activities are kind of being logged. Would we be able to kind of use it as, I guess, a sort of cost forensic tool? So, for example, let's say in January, your costs were $50,000, and in February, your cost is $60,000, and you want to see what were all the changes that happened to get to go from 50 to 60. And I'm sure there's infrastructure that's gone up and gone down. So it's literally a log that says, hey, somebody spun these 10 things up that, with this estimated cost, there were 3 of these things that went down, this, storage increased, and so you could kind of see the sort of the all the different changes and have it in one place, and then be able to present that and say, yeah, the reason why our bill went up or went down or changed by this was because of these key things that, activities that happened.
Right. Like show me the most expensive, like the top 10% of the pull requests in this time range, so we can actually, like, that's what matters. The rest are not really important. Right. So Infracost has, there's a JSON output, and you can log that as a CI asset, or what one user is doing is taking all those logs and just putting it on S3. So it's there and they can analyze the data. Another user is feeding that to Kafka, where security teams are like building Grafana dashboards. This is the cool thing with open source is, you can do whatever you want with it. And what we then see is a bunch of use cases kind of emerge. This is very much being pulled by the community. And when we see like 50 people do this thing, we're like, all right, maybe we should learn the best way of that thing and kind of make that part of the product. That's how we ended up with the GitHub Actions integration. A couple of users started doing it themselves. They shared it with us. We're like, okay, that's a nice way of handling it that way. We're gonna, do you want to contribute yourself? But yeah, that I hadn't thought of the logging change, but the dashboard of like what's going on across a time range is very interesting for sure.
Yeah, that's a really cool use case you came up with, John, because when in my practitioner days, how many times we'd celebrate, we pulled off some awesome optimization that's going to save so much money, and you go to check in and celebrate the savings, and it's all eaten up by who knows who launching who knows what, and you're just like, but having that like log that you can go and be like, it was him, right. And who to go talk to and what to focus on next. That's awesome. That would be an awesome use case, I would imagine. It almost makes me want to go back and do it. But
again, these are like the common requests that I get all the time from clients, right? Like when we do regular cost reviews and we look at these changes, it's always like, what happened here? Who did what, right? And so being able to come up with a timeline or a log with a dollar amount attached to it, right? It would be great, right?
Yeah, I remember in Evercloud, we would do this for customers, and we're like, hey, have you considered setting up showback and chargeback reports for your Kubernetes projects? And one of them was like, yeah, we did that. And guess what? The dev teams just ignored the emails. So I've done all this stuff, and we send it, and like until someone like makes them feel some sort of pain, they just don't care. The quotas just keep going up, up, and up. And then every 6 months, we have to do this stop. Everybody, you got to reduce your usage, make it optimize. And then guess what? 6 months again, we got to do it again. We got to do it again. I'm kind of tired of that. So with Infracost, we're like, can we fix that problem so we don't have to do that again? Because it's very disruptive. And usually it's got to be pushed down, top down from VP or CTO, and it's got to impact all the dev teams. Or I guess the FinOps team can then say, like, this is where the optimizations need to be made. But then there's a bunch of negotiations with product management and engineering management, like how we're going to prioritize this over the other stuff. And I'm like, it's painful to watch.
It is painful to live, just to know about it.
Yep. Like I've never seen an engineer email and say, hey, can you reduce my resource quota? Like I actually don't need that quota anymore. Never happens.
No, not at all. It's always like, well, if you reduce it, what happens if this happens or this? It's like, I don't know. If you're in a company that you can't have, I don't know, an hour of downtime, you need to change jobs. You need to get out of the company. Like that's not lasting. That's like I understand like millions can be lost in an hour. I 100% understand that. However, based on quarterly profits, like you should be able to lose something.
Sure. And like, here's the cost implication of that change. Like we're talking about, I don't know, a 2-hour change to like update all the staging environments to use single AZ. How much is that going to cost me? Like just trying to be more proactive, I guess, about it versus just like, let's just change it and see what happens next month.
Yeah. Like I would actually, cause that's an argument we've had where it's like, you trust in Amazon, Azure, GCP to do random maintenance at any time to the hardware that is backing the resource you're using at any time that it can go down, and everybody just signs off on it. The second anybody comes in and says, hey, we're gonna have this proactively resize your instances based on usage, everybody starts freaking out. It's like, oh, how would you know? It's like, we know. Like, and even if you don't know, it's like, just let me out, let somebody step out on the ledge and like take like a little bit of it. So has anybody looked at I know this is more of people updating their cost change, but like, can it also proactively change? Like, meaning like if I'm monitoring and then just say, hey, this is at a threshold of X, like all the time, it's at 60% or higher of non-usage. I'm just going to have this go and resize.
Yes. Not at the moment, but if you look at the security tools, that's exactly the evolution they went in. So initially it was like just telling you, hey, you have an issue here. And then it was like, hey, here's the one-click fix. That's what Sneak did. So here's the code, here's the policy, and here's the recommendation. Do you want to apply this change right now? And you just kind of just say yes. So make it super easy. Do kind of the job for them almost. That's the kind of stuff we'd like to get into. But at the moment, no.
I have a question. So how is this different from the pricing calculator? You still got to input the data, right, to calculate some based on assumptions, right? I understand the template, the Terraform template, that infrastructure as a code. I mean, that you can get the cost, right? But you still need to get some input from the engineer or the team to get a final cost. So how is this different than the pricing calculator? It's just you can get it in one place, or
it is a lot easier. So the key difference is for when you go to the Azure calculator or the AWS calculator, you kind of add the service, and then in there you're clicking around, and then for some parameters you have to provide usage estimates, right? But for some of the other stuff you don't. It just tells you like, if you have this checkbox, then it's going to cost you this much. So this does the same thing, but you then focus on any assumptions about your usage, and you can kind of tweak just those. So the rest of it shows you. So for example, in this example here, the AWS instance cost, you don't need to provide any usage information because that is a fixed fee. As soon as that code is deployed, you will pay that roughly. Whereas for S3 or Lambda, you have to provide the usage. And then for like S3, instead of saying, like the calculator says, here's all the parameters, we can say, well, we can see you're only using these options. So really, you only need to provide these 3 options. And then being able to pull that from something like CloudWatch to say, actually, for the last month, it was this. So imagine it's a programmatic calculator that you can kind of use easily, and then you can check in the output of that into the code. And then you can, because it's programmatic, you can do a bunch of other stuff around it in the future, dashboards and what's changing and things like that.
Got it. I see it useful for projects, not for everything we do or we deploy. I mean, for certain things, I probably find it very useful for a project that's we don't know if it's gonna cost us 50 or 100,000. So probably for that, I see it useful. I don't see it useful for every, right? I mean, the app, or the one we want to deploy in the cloud, that will be probably too much. But this is really useful. Thanks.
Yeah, the usage file where you have to provide the estimates. This is like, it's got to be easier, right? Because if you're asking me to like go put in all the usage parameters for every change I'm making, I'm not going to do that. Like you're saying, right? For major changes, I will, because it's maybe $100,000 and I want to know. But if you're asking me to do that for every change, that's not what users are doing at the moment. It's too complicated at the moment. I think we've got to be able to fetch in the usage data, so it's all more automatic.
Yeah, to your point too. Even the pricing calculator, like S3, like it requires you to put in how many gigs, like how many terabytes, like what you're using, like what your usage is. Otherwise, it can't give you like an accurate number. I am curious though on the endpoints you mentioned. So Amazon has now savings plan, which heavily requires on tags, meaning like if your resources aren't tagged, there's some things that it won't track. But you know, say you have everything tagged, right? Like, I don't know how good the API is for it. I have seen like, I have seen people try to resell it, meaning like people they were using savings plan and they were like managing kind of RIs for companies and then reselling basically the savings plan service plus a little bit of their mojo to try to do it. I don't know if that's something to look at. But I have looked at that and I've been using S3 Lens. And that I've been talking pretty heavily with the product team for that, so I want it for more of kind of what you're doing. Like I want it for more of the analytical, but also cost optimization, because it does track on prefixes. It basically tracks at a bucket level all the way down to a prefix level. The problem is that the reporting system is garbage. It comes like you can see it in a consolidated account and you can see a lot of what it's doing and it's amazing there. But if I wanted to like download or share it, it's impossible. Like I would have to dump it to something that was a more verbose and larger sized CSV than the detailed billing report. Like it's that crazy for and I mean for smaller companies, great. I have like at this point, like we've consolidated and we still have like 60 accounts. So it's like very hard to not have something like that. But like stuff I really like what you're doing with kind of state-based, and I definitely have to check this out. I apologize, I have to jump off, but this is very, very great presentation.
Thank you. No, that's a very good point on Lens. We've got to look at that more. I'm looking at the other comments to see if there's anything I haven't answered.
The one question I saw, I don't know if it got answered, but it was, do you need Sentinel or OPA or any of the policy stuff to use this? And the answer is no. We have a command line tool that you can use to process the Terraform configuration locally. And then, like we mentioned, there's the integration with the CI systems, GitHub and GitLab, that kind of stuff. Yeah, exactly.
This second use case, so the whole policy stuff is fairly new in the community. Like even OPA and HashiCorp Sentinel and cost policies is like bleeding edge. Where you're writing like automated policies. So this is like brand new. And you don't have to use like OPA. The majority of people we see are doing this. They just, at this stage, they just want to understand the implication of the changes before things are changed. And they want a comment in the pull request. Very simple. And with that, you don't need OPA or Sentinel or anything like that.
You mentioned that some of the things like savings plans and custom private pricing and those sort of discounts was going to be part of the like enterprise paid program. It's just such a complicated problem, especially like savings plans when it has to do with like coverage percent and things like that. And I'm just curious how you're approaching that. Just kind of like your thinking around how it fits in.
Yeah. So for custom price books, we want the ability for a company to be able to kind of specify a price point to say, for these sets of prices, don't use the on-demand price, like use my one. For savings plans and RIs, we haven't dug into it much with this project yet because we don't have visibility of the entire account. So if you look at like this specific change here, the CLI can see that this project is being changed, but if the RIs are in a different account or what else is in this account, this CLI doesn't have access to that. Can it have access to that? Sure, if the user wants to give it in the future. That's the kind of calculations that Tim was working on, 6 years ago when we were decoding how RI discounts are applied across accounts and the priority order. So we kind of went through that, and it is complicated. Yeah, sorry, someone wanted to speak, I think.
No, sorry, I was going to say, because you don't know where the RI discount will be applied, unless it's savings plan. Savings plan will apply it across all VMs, all instances, right? But the RI, you don't know that's going to be, you're going to know at the end probably, right? At the end of the month, if the RI will be applied there, but otherwise, you don't know, right? So that's going to be hard to estimate.
Yeah, like Tim wrote like automated test tools to figure out like because we're essentially decoding how AWS's billing engine works, right? It's going to decide where the discounts are applied, and it's going to come up with a number. We have to be able to match that number. That game was very difficult to do. We did do it, and we did compare like our numbers with AWS bills. We got it very close. But we're not sure if we want to go do that again with Infracost, because I feel like that's like a solved problem. Or the vendors themselves, the other vendors or the cloud providers, that's what they're focusing on just now. We're focusing on, all right, given all of that complexity, how the heck do we make people who actually buy this stuff understand it? So when it comes to this, there's like nothing about cost. So how do we bring all that stuff into the workflow? That's kind of really what we're mainly focused on just now.
And I find it so complicated, so complex, because there's so many services, right? The project, I mean, it's gonna the usage or the provision or use different products, services. It can get very complex. It can get very complex. I mean, you can get a rough estimate, but never gonna get it close. Yeah. I don't know what's the goal. We get it between 10% of a final bill, or I don't know what the goal is, but so I don't think we're never going to get to that.
Yeah, we're not really shooting for like, we kept asking the users, like, does it matter that this thing isn't 100% accurate? They're like, no, I get it. It's an estimate, because what I'm looking for is, am I doing something totally stupid? If so, tell me so I don't deploy this change. And 80% of the time, 90% of the time, you're not. But you still want that check. You want the check to run, just like you do with security checks. The security checks are running on every CI/CD commit. And this is kind of like the safety net for costs. So there's no typos here. You didn't just accidentally put 10,000 IOPS instead of 1,000. It's fine. Just keep shipping. Just keep shipping. And in like less than 10% of the cases, it's like, hey, you really want to do this? This is going to cost you like $70,000. And a lot of the times that $70,000 thing will ship. And then eventually at the end of the month or like 6 months later, someone will find out, like, why didn't we catch that sooner?
Yeah, this will solve a lot of stupid headaches.
Yeah, but in that case, you don't want to do a POC before. I mean, it's going to cost 100,000 or 50,000. I don't know. Sometimes you can do a POC in a month, and then you'll know how much it's going to cost you, right? If it makes sense or not. And then, of course, other metrics, the performance, other metrics, if it makes sense or not. So,
yeah, no, absolutely. For things where they're like a project that you want to engineer this thing, and you want to like, we're going to bust out spreadsheets, and we're going to make sure that this thing is financially going to make sense. Great. But that takes a lot of effort just to do that itself. And we're like, why isn't that happening on everything? Like if it becomes easy enough, if I can just drop this thing into a CI/CD pipeline and I get the safety net. If you're asking me to like spend 2 days come up with a forecast and spreadsheets, I'm not going to do it on every change, right? But if it's like less than a minute and it's automated in a CI/CD pipeline, would you want that? That's the kind of question now for us. Because these engineers are expensive, right? So we don't want to slow them down, and we don't want to say, hey, as part of your job, you're now doing front end, back end, database, DevOps, security, everything is shifting left. And we're like, here's a bunch of other cloud cost stuff that's now part of your job description. And like, where's the tooling? Where's the stuff that makes it super easy? Because they're not going to do it if it's not super easy. They're just going to kind of just ignore it.
Just kind of thinking on that kind of that timeline, like I was thinking, so one of the things when when we talk about engineers spinning things up and not really thinking about costs, and this tool is basically giving them pause, right? It's like, hey, I just want to spin up a bunch of instances and get the job done, right? We talked about doing things quick versus doing things efficiently, right? And this is going to stick a number right in front of their face and go, okay, you can spin it, but this is what you're going to do to our bill if you do this, right? But again, this is kind of giving it as a, is it a monthly number that we're giving, or is it an hourly number? Okay,
we did both, but what we're seeing is like the hourly, people don't think of it as the hourly, so you got to have like the monthly delta. So by default, we're now in the pull request, it's just monthly.
Right, because the next logical step would be, again, this is a future feature, is to find a way that you can add some sort of budgeting system to this, right? So that engineers know, like, hey, this is the budget that my team has, and this is how close I'm getting to it. And if I, if I deploy these next, 10 services, I'm going to be over my budget. You know what I mean? And then,
that's a cool idea.
Some VP of finance is going to call me and be like, what the hell, right? So
that's what I was thinking along the lines of logging all of the changes for all of the GitHub actions here, logging all the changes for the month and matching that to a budget.
Right.
I was gonna say to a budget that we don't know how we got the budget, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes budgets are bogus or some high level numbers. So that's hard. I mean, all I'm saying is it's very complex.
Yeah,
absolutely. Compared to a budget that someone came out with that number that nobody knows how.
In my last position, we were coming up with the actuals budget, and then another kind of engineering estimated budget of what would our costs be without the influence of RIs and savings plans at the enterprise discount on demand cost, which this kind of thing, I mean, if you put in the enterprise discount or PPA numbers using the paid product, and you compare that to your engineering estimated usage versus that inflated budget number and show that back to engineers, then you have the number that engineers should be looking at. And then all the stuff that the FinOps team manages for RIs and savings plans, that's just added value or added benefit to what the engineers are working on.
Yeah, that's a really good point. A couple of users, we said hey, this thing doesn't have your custom price books. They're like, I don't want the engineers to know that, because we worked hard to get those savings plans and RI commitments. And I'd rather them to think of it in terms of list prices.
Yeah, and doing it that way also shows the benefit of the changes that the engineering teams are making themselves to reduce cost, and then separately the benefits of the FinOps teams and how
that's the value on top.
Missing the word. The total value of your FinOps team versus the total value of what the engineering team is putting out from the product side, as well as savings and reconciliation stuff.
Yeah, because shutting down resources or changing the IOPS and stuff, that's what they did, and that's great. And then what was all this stuff on top that we negotiated for and got savings plans and spent weeks doing RI analysis, and that's the value of that stuff.
Again, another crazy future feature, but would you be able to then say, for example, if an engineer decided that they were going to suddenly change all your instance types from an M series to a T series for whatever reason, and he didn't realize that your finance team purchased all these RIs that were M's, and now you're going to screw them, right? Would you be able to alert and say, not only is this instance going to cost you X, but it's going to cost you Y in, unused
in loss value?
Yeah, something like that, or at least a guardrail that says, hey, you're going to do something that's really going to screw up your finance team.
Yeah, so I think it's in one of the FinOps challenges, right? Just getting engineers to take action, because usually the timelines are very different. Like the engineers are working on pull requests, they're shipping, and then the pull request gets merged, and then it will get deployed at some point in the future. And we want to kind of get to them at the right point, because if you email them like 2 weeks after they ship that change, they're just going to delete your email and move on unless it's like important. And if you tell them in advance, like who tells them in advance? They've got like 20 things to do. So we want to see like, okay, what's the message you want that person to see in the pull request? So is it just like speak to FinOps, which is probably 90% of the time is like, hey, if you're changing this, just give us a heads up, or like, can we get the heads up automatically maybe? That this person is just changing all these instance types. I want to know before that goes to production. That's kind of like the bleeding edge use case.
Right.
We're working on this now with community people.
Yeah, like a control tower or like a catalog, right? Built in your tool, so they know what's coming. Well, what's coming? Yeah, that would be great to have that, so they know what to use. Because of the RIs or the saving plans or whatever reservations we have purchased to take that into consideration.
Yeah. And if you kind of get to them at the right time, you can have that discussion. All of this we want to do is to enable the discussion to happen early, because these discussions are happening, right? But they're happening late, and that creates frustrations because people are like on different timelines now. Like, yeah, I'm getting pushback from my managers and product managers that I got to ship the next feature, and you want me to go and fix the costs stuff? Like, why didn't you tell me earlier? Or like, why didn't you tell me at the time when I was changing that infrastructure? Because then it would have been a 2-minute change versus now I got to go rework. Then this thing has to go to staging, got to be tested, then go to production. Like, can we have that discussion at the right time?
Ali, Ilya speaking. I wonder if, maybe I missed it, but I wonder if those monthly estimates, right? You said that it's just like monthly numbers, if they include some elasticity considerations. Basically from like my own experience, I've been like, this is a great idea. Like what you're doing is just, what should have been done, like a long time back. So like, I remember at some point I had like this like repository and the pricing as well that I made like while at EA. So yeah. The problem that I always heard like from some like engineering teams lately is that, like there is a lot of elasticity, autoscaling going on. So like this, in many cases, the projection, especially monthly, will never be useful because like you're shipping some change, right? And it's just, it doesn't have any relation, right, to what it's going to be actually, in production.
Yeah. So for things like EKS, Kubernetes clusters that have the auto scaling on, or for Google Autopilot, again, another auto scaling Kubernetes cluster from Google where there's no even instances, there's no nodes. It's just your pods running on Google's infrastructure. For those, the users are saying, well, you can tell me what's going on right now. So for example, for EKS, we're just pulling the actual number of nodes right now that's running on production. Just pull that in, show that to the person. We can also do ranges. So a user is asking us, can you show me the min and max over the last 7 days? I want to know, like, but just bring that stuff into the workflow, make it super easy. And for things like the GKE Autopilot, the user is asking, can you just explain the pricing components to me? That this auto scaling thing is like, here's the parameters. And then I kind of know roughly what my range is, right? Like, yeah, there are use cases that do the crazy like viral thing, and then it's going to be like nobody knows what the cost is going to be. But a lot of the time there's patterns, and our business follows those patterns. One of our customers on AberCloud was the Middle East's largest ride-hailing company. And like 9 a.m., 5 p.m., the pod auto scalers kick in. Like it's just like classic, right? Like the pattern is kind of very well defined. Part of my PhD was modeling these usage patterns, where we came up with a syntax where, can you describe the pattern to me? Like in a very simple syntax, because if I know that pattern, then I can generate a better cost estimate as well. But it's not easy. Those are like the complications that, do you want to engineer your costs, or do you want to just ship it and see what happens? If you want to ship it and see what happens, go for it. But what people are doing is now, I'm kind of tired of that. And I want to actually engineer this thing in the same way we engineered security, where it's no longer like every 6 months, we're going to bring in a company, they're going to run a security audit across all the systems, they're going to find a bunch of stuff, and then we're going to have to go fix that stuff. Now it's like part of the workflow with tools like Sneak and Checkoff. And we're seeing, why aren't costs going through the same evolution?
That makes sense. And is it like already part of like an Infracost value proposition, or it's planned?
The fetching from CloudWatch is already there. So we're pulling in, and for things like EKS, where that's the big cost numbers, are for like the number of instances that are auto scaling. That stuff is already being pulled in.
Got it. Oh, that's awesome.
Thanks. One thing, so I like the approach that you guys are taking with Cloud Threat too. This is like a cool thing with having vendors on the call, is you're kind of taking a efficiency way of looking at it, right? And we're kind of saying, okay, I don't think there's like one single solution to cloud costs.
Definitely.
Right?
Yeah,
so
definitely.
Everyone's kind of looking at it. It's such a huge problem space that different vendors are like, okay, there's the whole showback and chargeback. There's the efficiency way, which is like exactly what these super, like the internet-based companies, right? It matters for them that each ride costs this much because that's the whole company, right? Whereas if you look at, I don't know, BMW, like they don't care about the efficiency score because their business isn't providing like internet-based services to other people.
Exactly.
And I think this is the cool thing with cloud costs, is like the cloud is just being used by a range of companies, and they have different competencies and they have different maturities. So they kind of need these different tools. Is Airbnb going to look at the instance costs? Probably not. They're auto scaling like crazy. So for them, it makes sense to look at the efficiency stuff, but go to an oil company and talk to them about like the efficiency of what?
No, you're completely right. Yeah, when we are talking, like to our potential customers, it's mostly, like those like engineering teams at, like internet companies. And we position ourselves as like post-deployment analytics.
Exactly.
And whenever, like we are pitching, we always like mentioning like Infracost as being like this pre-deployment safety net, right? That can give you like idea and prevent a lot of like wrong things like from happening. But then once everything is already running, you need to have like
the other
pulse, and you need to, and then you also need to do like allocation, like chargebacks, and that's a whole suite of like different, like solutions that you probably need for like proper FinOps practice. Yeah.
And at the same time, you kind of need to set up your tags and the vendor. So there's a bunch of stuff you got to do, right?
Definitely. Yeah. That's what makes FinOps interesting, right?
Exactly. That's why it's becoming a practice, right? That's why it's becoming a team, right? It's not just like something that we now do on the side. It's like there's a team of people now.
Yeah.
I probably should switch the lights on because otherwise it's going to be very dark.
Well, cool. I guess I have a question. Just in terms of the overall meetup, I know that for anybody that's come to other ones, we have open discussions and we have presentations like this. I guess, how do we want the balance to be going forward?
I just got to Santa Barbara yesterday, and I think it's about 5 a.m. in my time zone. So I should probably go sleep.
Yes, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ali.
Yeah.
Thanks, Ali.
Thank you for
Thank you. Great
Thanks
job.
very much for organizing this, and thanks for all the awesome discussion. Really appreciate that.